Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on Embedded BI. My name is Julia Honigsberger and I'm a consultant with Thorogood Associates. For anyone who doesn't know about Thorogood, I'll cover that a bit at the end of the session. The agenda today is pretty simple. I'm going to start by looking at some of the drivers for embedding BI, why you would do it, what are the advantages, and then I'm going to run through 3 examples and I've got some demos to help really bring it all to life. So, why embed BI? If you think about most activity within an organisation, it happens around a process. It could be a process for managing sales opportunities or planning or maybe managing a workforce. But whatever it is, the process is going to produce data which is extracted from the process and translated into information that can be used within BI and analytics. Then, when we find an insight within that BI environment, this causes us maybe to want to take an action back in the process. There's a bit of a disconnect there between finding the insight within BI and the resulting action that we take back inside the process. So the first example I'm going to cover today is all around embedding BI into the process. And I'm going to use a scenario where I'm managing maybe some Salesforce opportunities in the CRM process, and I'm using Tableau for my BI and analytics, which is quite an interesting space actually, because earlier this year Salesforce actually purchased Tableau, but we're still seeing the 2 organisations running relatively independently. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. So before we embed our BI into Salesforce, the situation looks like the example I had earlier. So we're going to start by extracting some data into Tableau. That might be done by IT or it might be done by the business. And then I'll log into Tableau, I'll make any selections and I'll start using those insights that have been set up for me to try and find out more about my situation. Then if I find an insight and I want to take action, I then need to go back into Salesforce, make those selections again and take the action. So there's an awful lot of duplication there. If we look at the embedded version of this use case, I've embedded Tableau into Salesforce and now I can switch between the 2 technologies in a single environment, relatively seamlessly really. I can make one set of selections and I can get to that action that I need to do much faster. Let's take a look. I'm going to tab over here into Salesforce and I'm going to log in. And Salesforce is going to try and help me. It's going to send me effectively to a page of the last things I was doing, which is quite helpful because the likelihood is I may well be following on with some of the stuff that I've already put in. So these are all the opportunities that I'm currently working on that I've been interacting with recently. But if I'm quite a busy salesperson, I might have many, many more opportunities that are actually in train for me that I want to start looking at. And I really need an insight as to how I'm doing and what I should be following up on, which are the imperatives for me. Now that information could be in a separate BI report within Tableau, for example. But in this solution, it's been built into Salesforce. It's been embedded for me. So if I click on my Tableau Insights pane, this one's going to open up a Tableau report that's been built, which is going to show me all about my performance. And at this point, all of the kind of power of Tableau, which is a really great BI and analytic tool, that I can use to start to investigate my situation. So it's showing me all of the wins. I can start to see my sort of success rate. And as I trip into future, I can start to see what I'm looking at in terms of prospects and suspects. Tableau's got some great ways of visualizing data. I've built a little sales funnel here. So, for example, I can limit it to just proposals, for example, and start to see how things are doing. I've got a map here, a geography of the US where these opportunities are. So I can get a lot more information about what's going on. And if I'm thinking, well, I really need some help directing me as to what I want to work on immediately, what are my sort of real imperatives, if I have a look at next month and start to see really what I should be focusing on, Tableau's updated the charts on this visual so that I can start to see what might be important. And I can see down here that Ingots technology has got some huge opportunities there and I really need to focus on them. So if I click on Ingots, gives me a bit of tooltip with a little bit of information, but more importantly for today's session, it gives me a click to view account page. If I click on that, then Tableau is going to pass that information back to Salesforce and it's going to open up on that particular account So I didn't have to go in and re-pick ingots. It's found the account for me, and I can then start to work within that particular customer, and I can start to see all of the opportunities down here that I might want to focus on this month. I can see quite a big one there, supply chain. I've got a £5 million opportunity that I might want to work on. So that's an example of where embedding BI into a process, in this case Salesforce, really helped me get rid of that sort of different environments, and it allowed me to start to take action once I'd used the BI tool to help me find any insight. My second example that I'm going to look at today is very similar, but there is a key difference. And here I'm going to continue to use Salesforce CRM as my process tool, if you like. But this time I'm going to take the role of maybe a business manager who doesn't spend a lot of time in Salesforce, so he's not very familiar with it, but still needs to interact with those sales guys who are working on those opportunities. And this time my BI tool of choice is Microsoft's Power BI. And before I embed anything, the situation looks very similar to the original problem. I need to refresh my Power BI workbook with any information from Salesforce. I need to access that workbook. I need to make my selections and analyse the results and start to try and find an insight. And if I find something that I really need to act upon, that then needs to go back into Salesforce. And once again, I need to make my selections in order to do my action. Very similar problem to the one we saw before with Tableau and Salesforce. But what if this time I embed some of Salesforce into Power BI? Now I can use Power BI to carry out my analysis, but when I find something that needs action, I could use, for example, a Microsoft Power App to post that information contextually back into Salesforce. Power Apps are very easy to build wizard-driven applications that Microsoft have made available so that you can start to interact between, for example, technologies. Let's take a quick look at that one. So this time, different browser. This is Power BI natively, and I can see my reports, and I can see one called Analyze Salesforce Opportunities. I'm going to open that report, slightly different perspective here from before. You notice bottom right there's a little extra window opened up. That's my Power App that I'm going to use to interact with Salesforce. So I've got a heat map or a tree map up here top right, which shows me the value of my opportunities. I've got the actual numbers coming down here on the right just to help me. And down here I've brought through from Salesforce all of the chatter commentary that's going on about all of the opportunities that I work with. So in my organisation, it's true in Thorogood actually, we use Salesforce, and we use chatter as a way of linking conversations to actual activities so that it's not through separate emails that you have to search through your email list for. It's all linked to the opportunity within Salesforce. Now before we saw we had some information with ingots, so if I click on ingots, all of my grids update, and I can see bottom left that I've got a couple of comments in there. Somebody has replied to or entered a chatter comment, if you like, around the finance opportunity and the HR opportunity. But I don't know if you remember when we were looking in Salesforce before, there was a very large opportunity around supply chain. I've got a £5 million opportunity here, and if I pick that opportunity, I can see that actually there's no comments been made about that. And as a manager, that might be a really difficult situation for me because I feel like I've got no visibility of what's going on. So what I want to do is I want to join that chatter conversation, and I want to try and drive some comments from the people who are responsible. And rather than going to Salesforce, I might not be familiar with Salesforce, I can just work straight within Power BI. So I might say, guys, what's occurring here? This is one of our big ops, but I have no visibility. I now just click Post Comment. That then has been pushed back into Salesforce, and I'm going to go back to that other window that I've left open from before, and if I now click on that supply chain opportunity and I go to the chatter panel, what I can see just now, the comment that I put into Power BI has been pulled through into the chatter commentary, so I don't need to understand how to work with Salesforce. I don't need to kind of get into that. I can just go straight into Power BI, and if I see a problem, I can start to communicate using Chatter. And that was all achieved through using a Power App to embed all of that Chatter commentary within Power BI. My third example is a little bit different, actually. This is a scenario that we see quite often at customers where different parts of the business will be really working with siloed information. So, for example, you may have a finance department with their own data, and they may be using, say, Tableau to do their BI. HR might have picked Click and have their own database. Sales might have chosen Power BI, for example. And that could be driven by departmental preferences. It might be driven by legacy systems, all sorts of reasons why that's happening. This is fine until somebody, like a senior stakeholder, needs to get a combined view of what's going on. Maybe they want to look at KPIs from each of the business areas together. So now we get into a bit of a complex scenario of needing to extract that information from each of the silos, combine it into a single data store, and report it together. But actually the system gets worse than that, because we also hit the problem that it's very likely that there will be business logic built into maybe the data layer, but maybe also the business intelligence or the analytics layer. Usually if you look at a Power BI or a Tableau workbook, that might be the place where all of the ratios and the aggregate on-the-fly calculations are made. By extracting the data out of the departmental data layers, I'm probably going to have to replicate that business logic in probably the data layer and also BI and analytics layer. This then increases the likelihood of, well, first of all, it's going to take duplicate effort, and that's a bit of a frustration, but it's also introducing the potential for discrepancies between the business logic applied in the departmental layer and the business logic applied in the data layer, in the combined layer. That can cause all sorts of issues, most problematically that those people who wanted to get an overview of what's happening in the departments are actually seeing different numbers from those people working in the departments, and that causes an awful lot of, which is the right version of the truth, and lots of people starting to mistrust data from within the organisation. So what happens if we don't duplicate that data, but we simply embed it into, for example, a web container, if you like? We can then get rid of the need to duplicate, and we can avoid business logic mismatches, because all the business logic is still sitting back there in our departmental silos. And we can either simply use the technologies that the silos use and embed those into our container, or if we want something that maybe has a little less of a kind of patchwork quilt feel to it and has a bit more of a single product feel to it, we might ask each of those departments to produce a standardized template that's going to mean that when I combine it all onto my single screen, it's going to start to look a lot more like a single solution. The other thing that we can do with this approach is that we can choose a fairly thin layer of information to combine. We can bring some ratios or some percentages through that are the real key metrics for each of the areas. But if somebody wants to then drill back into understanding a bit more about it, they can actually just be directed back to the source data rather than having to duplicate that information within the container. And the more we can start to take the context that the user's working in back into the silos, that's going to really help us with a kind of seamless transition from this container-based layer back into the silos. Let's take a look at that. What I'm going to use here actually is some screenshots of an anonymized version of a solution that we've been working on with a customer. We've changed the use case, but it shows the example. So what I've got here is I've got a container, if you like, with a number of pieces of information pulled from various parts of the business. And I might have given them, in this instance, I've given them all a tiny little template, each part of the business, and asked them to populate it with the KPI that they want to use to represent their business. So on the left I've got some HR data, employee satisfaction, moving through a process piece of information, some productivity, sales product counts, active customers, some churn rates, right through to my financial information and my profit margin on the end. And in this example, I'm interested by, as a standard choice in Europe, I might be a European manager for a particular part of the company and for a particular division. And I've chosen a couple of key activities that I want to focus on. But at any time I can change that, and I do that simply by clicking on a sort of personalization section. I've only built a very few things in here, but you can imagine this could be extended. I've said what business areas I want, so I've chosen those two tiles we saw, HR and process. I've chosen the company, and I might want to change that, for example, to Meridian Bank. I could change the division, I could change the geography, and if I had different types of metadata in different parts of the business, rather than struggling to align them, I could just simply allow the user to pick from those different pieces of metadata. I click on Save, and that's now been saved, and at that point, if I go back to my dashboard, I'm taken back to reflect the changes that I've seen. So here my employee satisfaction, which previously was around the 80-something%, has dropped a bit, 72.7%. And down here I've got my employee satisfaction tile, 72.7%, and I need to understand whether I need to go back into the reports that part of the business are using. So I can include maybe in here a little tooltip. So this is a kind of small piece of information. Again, we're not bringing through large pieces of information. We're just asking this particular department to surface to me those parts of the information that they think will most help me understand whether I need to drill any further. Things are actually not looking too bad. My satisfaction rate is going up, but if I did want to drill into this, I could then click on this Explore link and open up a number of reports that have been produced by that department. So no duplication of effort here. These are reports that they've built that they maybe use every day, or they could be special ones that they've built in order for me to be able to understand what's going on. And I could have as many as I want, and I click on one of those links, and that takes me then into whatever technology it's built on, be it Power BI. In this example, we've got a Power BI report, but it could be Tableau, it could be Click. We've managed to take through the context. So we've taken through the Meridian Bank that I'd made on my previous selection. And that means that this satisfaction number that I see here, 72.7 it was, rounded to one decimal place before, is the same number I saw on the previous screen. And we've managed to do that using parsing parameters. So any technology that allows you to load a report and pass parameters to it, be it Power BI or Tableau, the framework can do that, even if it's not the technology that the framework was built in. So in doing this, what I've managed to do is I've managed to bring a lot of information together in a single container with very little data effort. I've got a framework built in a web app. All of the effort was done by the departments providing that information, and I've minimized the rework by simply leveraging the existing BI that those departments are already using. And so I've also managed to get rid of any debate about numbers that are seen by different people. I see the same number that they see because it's the same report based on the same data. So that was my third scenario, and I'm just going to recap on what we had a look at. The first example was where I embedded my BI tool into my process, and in doing that I managed to use the power of something like Tableau to investigate my data, and when I found an insight I could simply click and be taken to the right place in Salesforce without having to make those repeated selections. My second scenario was really embedding Salesforce into Power BI using a Microsoft Power App. And that allowed me again to use the power of something like Power BI to find a problem. But then rather than have to go back into the app, I could simply post information back into the app for those people that typically use it to pick up without me having to do that. And my third scenario was really using a container or a web app container to combine information from different parts of the business without having to do any data rework, or maybe minimal data rework, to get those front view reports showing. And then leveraging the existing investment in my BI, whatever the technology, by just passing people back to those reports. I said at the beginning I'd talk a little bit about Thorogood for anybody who doesn't know us. Simply, Thorogood is a business intelligence and analytics specialist. That's what we do. We're independent. We partner with what we consider to be the best BI technologies, people like Microsoft, Tableau, Click, but we are independent and advise customers on different technologies. We are based in the UK and in the US, but also in India, Singapore, and in Brazil. And in terms of what we do and areas of the business that we get involved in, well, we work across the full range of BI and analytics activities, from helping customers with analytics strategies and roadmaps through to design and development of the sort of applications that we've seen today, and we do training, support, maintenance. So if you are interested in finding out a bit more about Thorogood, www.thorogood.com will give you a bit more information. And if anybody has any questions, please raise them or contact me. My email address, my LinkedIn are on the screen. I'd be happy to try and help. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time today.